afternoon, good evening, wherever you're consuming this broadcast. Welcome to Ionisms. My name is Ian, and I host this podcast, which largely revolves around movies, pets, geopolitics, and cricket. What a great combination, isn't it? And so it's a slow burn. There is no instant gratification and fast clips and REM kind of movements. And the topics largely are very detailed and deep dive oriented, right? So if this is something that floats your boat, then stick around till the end. I've got a fascinating episode coming up for you. A lot is said and done about the recently concluded fourth test match between India and Australia at the Border Gavaskar Trophy at Melbourne. And there has been a lot of noise. In case you have not heard of all the noise, which rock are you living under? But if you're a cricket fan, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. So I thought I put together some content for some of you who recently stumbled upon or accidentally bumped into the Indian social media content. And thereof, the impressions that you have formed or the perceptions that you have formed may not be completely accurate. So if you are perhaps an Australian, suddenly, tuned in here and trying to figure out what makes the Indian fan tick, this is the video for you. This is the content for you. And I have an interesting way, or I think it's an interesting way to present it. So I'm going to tie the geography, the economy, the demography angle and its impact on the social media or the people or eventually the players. And so you will see a correlation. And so what will be your takeaway, right? So by the time you exit this episode, you'll probably have a slightly better nuanced understanding of the Indian culture, India as a country, Indian cricketing culture, and of course the social media fan. So that's the 3 or 4 takeaways that you will have after this episode. Look, I'm no subject matter expert. Like I'm not like a geopolitical expert or a cultural ambassador. I clearly can't speak for 1.4 billion people. But having traveled and lived across, not just across the 4 corners of the country, north, south, east, west, but also globally in multiple locations, what I could bring to the table is like a balanced view, in my view, a balanced view, a neutral, objective perspective. This is largely for the first timer, like it's like India social media 101, if you will, from a cricketing standpoint. And to explain that, one would need to give you a backstory. And so this is that backstory. Right off the bat, get started with the geography. Like first understand and I'll tell you why I'm giving you the geography angle to the story. You're talking about 3.2 million square kilometers, like the 7th largest in the world, about 1.43 billion people as of 2024, 28 states, 8 union territories. The capital is in the north, New Delhi, and the major cities, Mumbai, Bangalore, Kolkata, Chennai, Hyderabad, and Pune, major hubs. And so the reason I give you all this, and I'm going to relate it back to cricket, for example. Let's start right from the bottom. So the major cities. So Mumbai, Bangalore, Kolkata, Chennai. So these are, if you've been watching IPL, so Mumbai Indians is from Mumbai, and then RCB, Royal Challengers Bangalore, Chennai Super Kings, and Kolkata Knight Riders, and so Sunrisers Hyderabad. And so that's the reason why the franchisees set up their fan base, their HQs, bases these cities, because the maximum crowd is in these concentrated in these urban cities. Delhi being the capital, so Delhi Capitals. And then there are 28 states. What this means is, and if you are outside of India, and if you're, say, an Australian, largely you speak English and perhaps 1 or 2 other dialects or the other languages. In India, it can suffice to say that 28 states speak almost 22 different languages, if not more, and there could be some 300 odd dialects. What it also means is, even for us localites, when we travel from one state to the other, the cuisine, the way we look also changes and differs. A close example would be, or analogy would be, think of the European Union, right? So A Belgic will be very different from a French, will be very different from a German to that of a British national, isn't it? And yet they are in the same region. So it's kind of a similar analogy, right? People in Bangalore or Chennai would have a very different look about them, or predicament about them, or vocabulary, or taste and preferences, or social cultural norms, very different from to those who are there, say in Delhi, which is in the north, or Gujarat, which is in the north west, if you will. So it is quite diverse, and that's been India's superpower. That such a highly diverse country coming together as one is in an incredible feat in itself, right? And then there is cricket as a sport that integrates this diversity. There is sport like cricket, and then there is, of course, movies. Now, you've obviously heard about Bollywood, but Bollywood is just the Hindi film industry. There are at least 4 or 5 very powerful, very strong, very solid other film industries: the Telugu, the Malayalam, the Tamil, and the Kannada film industry. Very, very strong influence. So, movies and cricket form a major part of the social psyche or the consciousness of not just the urban elite, as it were, but even tier 2 cities, tier 3 cities, kind of unites the country. And as is the case, right, when you're talking about 1.43 billion people or 1.4 billion people, let me tell you, make it more relatable. So when you're talking about 1.4 billion people, 60%, roughly plus minus, are below the age of 30. So you're talking about roughly about 600, 700 million people who are very young, like 30 and below, and probably some 20% are below 20. So now let me give this in contrast. So the India average median age is 26, 27, 28. So it's a very young country. But that's the first, the vibrancy, the youth is quite evident and apparent, as compared to, say, some of the other geographies where the average age is slightly higher. Like, for example, Japan is in the mid 50s, right? So, because people are having less children, and that's been the economic problem in many geographies around the world. So, India is home to this large youth population. And that is the boon and the bane in some way or the other. Think of it like, how do you manage 700 million youngsters in a nation? How do you redirect them? How do you employ them? How do you keep them engaged? And then you are in the age of this low attention span, which is a global phenomenon, nothing to do with India. And so you want instant gratification. And so factor IPL in the scheme of things, 20 overs, high voltage, drama, in almost like instant result when you compare it with Test cricket, which is why IPL valuation has gone off the charts. Like, it's just a massive 77 matches over a course of 2 months almost is where the money lies, right? And it's very difficult to beat that logic. So one can understand why broadcasters clamor to host IPL, why they want a share in the pie, because the return of investment is quick, instant, and very high. And so people are like, if this is the cash cow, how do I then redistribute it elsewhere? So that's where the cricketing body, the Board of Control of Cricket in India, BCCI, is the governing body for the sport in India. Now, BCCI often is made to look like the villain, like the big bad corporation who's trying to do and I'm not a BCCI expert or anything like, so I've already given that disclaimer earlier. But I often wonder, and I'm just playing the devil's advocate here, how else do you manage this complexity? How do you handle this magnitude of people? How do you, we could, at this point in time, we could probably have at least 3 national level teams. 3, proper national level teams. So you're only 11 playing in the test squad. Probably have two more fully functional test squads at that level. And so by design, by default, there will be a situation where not everybody will be happy. There will be careers that will get messed up, lost to opportunity. It's much like if you've been following cricket. Think of the West Indies of the 70s and 80s, where so many people couldn't get a chance within the team because it was so power packed with performers, or the Australian team of the early 2000s, right? There were so many other players who just couldn't break in. So India is going through a similar phase. With that, now it is 2024, 25, where social media, the platform to speak, express your disappointment, is part of the DNA. So India has a very high internet penetration, almost upwards of 60%. So maybe 55, 60% of the country uses internet or even more. So you put in numbers again. So out of 1.4 billion people, 700, 800 million people are online in various on various devices, shape, size, or capacity. But they are like on the mobile. So everything is centered around the mobile, right? So, and this huge online presence of the fan has also, it's not like that social media just arrived yesterday, right? It's probably gone through one iteration of, oh my God, this is fascinating, amusing, I don't know, to the next phase where I know what this is all about, I'm going to be more expressive, and to now getting into a phase of, I will work the social media for me. So there are tons of YouTube influencers who, clock some, millions of views. They're earning their livelihood. They have, millions of subscribers, and as is the case in other places around the world. So it's not something very different. But in India, the volume of these interactions suddenly, goes off the charts. And so these are the people who have access to social media at very low internet rates. Very low. In many cases, data is free, which is not the case, I know, in many places around the world. And so it is both a boon and a bane, because think of this, youth with unlimited data is a very lethal combination. Right? You can pretty much be online all day long and, do a whole bunch of things. You can do productive things, you can do unproductive things. And so if you're this first timer suddenly bumping into this melee of Indian social media, keep all these points in mind, right? The geography of the place itself has a different connotation to everything. The languages differ, and so the way of expression differs. Yes, English is spoken length and breadth of the country, but not everybody can articulate succinctly the way perhaps you could, because you're a native speaker. Here, it is an acquired skill. Right? And so there isn't a single unifying official language. So one tends to think that Hindi is a national language. It isn't. It is largely spoken, yes, absolutely. But there is still many other languages spoken by many more millions of people. And so there isn't one. So you're talking about 20 languages. So what happens is the way they express as well is is different. It also adds to the complexity of putting them under one bracket as an Indian. And I'll explain what I'm trying to say here. In many other places, when you ask who is a typical Australian, for example, or a typical American or a typical European, you could probably list down, if there are 10 characteristics, 6 would be similar or 7 would be similar, and maybe 2 or 3 nuances from region to region. In India, if there are 10 characteristics that define a typical Indian, you're probably looking at maybe 3 or 4 characteristic traits which are common across the length and breadth of the country, across 1.4 billion people, and 7 of them are not. And that is the makes the diversity quotient of it. And so to define that, so don't stereotype. So what media does usually is to stereotype India or Indians basis a very small sample set. And so take that with a grain of salt. And a classic analogy or example is when you watch any footage on news media or say a documentary or even in movies, in many Hollywood movies, the moment they say India, then the first shot pans to a dingy, crowded, chaotic lane with electric wires hanging and two cows sitting on the road and people pushing a bullock cart and a million people in that small space. Now, is that completely inaccurate? No, it is not. But is it to be generalized across the length and breadth of the country? Absolutely not. Because we also have 8-lane highways. You're talking about let me give you some numbers from an economy standpoint. You're looking at a little less than $4 trillion economy. It's like the fifth largest economy. I'm guessing it is bigger than Australia. $13 trillion is the GDP. It's the third largest globally in purchasing power parity. IT, pharma, textiles, agriculture, telcos, some of the major industries here. And so what happens is when all of this is interspersed with the availability of social media and they surface with their opinions, keep in mind that you have to see a 360-degree view and not just one sample data set. If I were to switch gears and take you through the typical characteristic traits that you will come across on social media, especially those commenting on cricket, given all this background that I told, the large audience is young, relatively young, 24, 25-year-olds who follow the cricket a little more closely. So some of the common traits, right, at the top would be unwavering loyalty. For them, the favorite players of all generations, like when it was Mr. MS Dhoni, he was, and he still is in some sense, like you cannot say anything against him. And Mr. Virat Kohli is another great example. Mr. Tendulkar was another great example. So anybody critiquing them, the default reaction is, how dare you? Like, how can you? What do you know about our players and stuff like that? So it's an emotional rebuttal more than a factual rebuttal. But then, like I said, remember the demography. And that's why I gave you all the reference to context and backstory. And therefore, they're emotionally charged. Everybody's going through a roller coaster ride. There is this, the pressure in the country to succeed, to be seen, to be heard, is there in every aspect. So there is nothing that you can get it done just like that. Almost nothing. There must be some things, of course. And it is both a good thing and a bad thing. So I'll give you some examples. If you are applying for a typical, say, IT sales job, so suppose you're 5 years of work X or 7 years of work experience, per application for, if it is a smallish company, when I say smallish, a company which has roughly, say 100 employees, 150 employees, number of applications for one job will be in the vicinity of 200, 300. Because it's a lesser known company, but still you have 300 people applying. Now you fast forward that to a larger organization, the big tech, you're talking about 2,000 people applying for one role. So imagine the process and imagine all aspects, right? Even think of the recruiter going through 2,000 resumes. Incredibly difficult, right? Then finding, sifting, shortlisting, and then finding the 2 or 3 people who make it to the final round, and the pressure on them to land the job is immense. It's intense. And so when these people get the opportunity eventually, they clearly will be very good, isn't it? That is also the case in cricket. Of course, there is an angle of regional politics. There is an angle of, there could be an angle of plain simple finance and or the lack of it. Right, there have been instances where a lot of talent from tier two, tier three uh, situations where people are not doing well financially, economically, but the dream, in some sense, for many and not for everybody. Of course, there's passion for cricket, but also they know that cricket is a cash cow. So if only they could play this one IPL match, and that's a common conversation that is quite prevalent. Please have my daughter or my son play this one IPL match, because what they are betting on is that once you get that visibility at the highest level, your life will change automatically overnight. And it has happened. It has happened with so many players. I won't. It'll be unfair to name any one of them, but I guess you know if you're following cricket, right? So the unwavering loyalty, therefore, is one of the key characteristic features of the feisty Indian fan. They once this person who's made it to the top, to the team, to at the highest level, they begin to hero worship. But it transcends the player's ability, and they worship the persona, the character, as it were, more than their cricketing ability. After a certain point, it is, and I cannot say it for certain, but it is probably an overlap from the movie industry. So in the movies, again, largely young audience, right? So young audience have lesser patience for nuances and subtleties, and if the window is opening slowly and then closing slowly, and the symbolism or the subtlety of it all is often missed, and what they need is instant reaction. Should be slow mos, big thuds, action punch. So there's a little bit of everything for everyone. So then one often gets confused if you're especially not from India. This is like a multi-genre movie. Like there are 6, 7 genres in one. How is that? That is because the producer views the exercise, not all, largely, that it is, I have to get my return of investment. How do I do that? I'll put in a little bit of romance, little bit of comedy, tragedy, action. So those who like tragedy, those who like action, they've got something. Check, check, check. So the probability of more footfalls in the theater, in the cinema hall, is high. And it's not an alien concept, right? This is what's happening in Hollywood as well. Think of all the DC and Marvel stories, right? It's now PG all, and they are the ones that make blockbuster money. Think of this single genre standalone movie, like something what Mr. Daniel Day Lewis would have done. How much money did they make? Like, what was it? Can it be comparable to the superhero movies? Perhaps not. But the mass is still where the money is, and mass consumption has to be simplistic, has to be probably larger than life, and easily understood. And that's where IPL hits the nail perfectly, where it is almost, there's very less nuance in IPL. Like, see it, hit it, forget about it, right? That seems to be the mantra, and of course there is an element of skill and power, and then they have very smartly tied it with the entertainment industry, which is the movie industry, right? So the film stars own, some of the biggest film stars own some of these franchises. And so that is why this magic is very appealing to a larger cross section of the audience. Now, cut that to test match cricket. Suddenly, this audience is grappling, low attention span, young audience used to quick reactions, quick results, the light, the dazzle, and you're suddenly in whites, and you have a session without any wickets, and it's like 3.5 runs and over, or 2 runs and over, and somebody in the commentary goes, "That was a very absorbing session of play," and this youngster goes like, "What is so absorbing? I mean, how silly is it? Why can't you just step out and hit it?" And that kind of will give you some reference to context. Is if you remember, and again we'll get into the fourth test match because that's the recent most memory. If you saw, there was a passage of play in the second innings where Mr. Yashasvi Jaiswal kind of almost lost it in between, where he was just flashing outside the off stump, trying to hit, hard hit the bowler and cut, and he was missing. Because before that he was calm, and after that he was calm. It's that instinctual thing that keeps creeping in. I've got to hit it hard. I've got to make an impact. I've got to make a statement. And the elephant in the room, right, Mr. Virat Kohli, has a high degree of that in his muscle memory. Booming statement drive, cover drive. If I've grown up doing that, it's been the reason for my success. Unfortunately, now what was the reason for his success is the reason for his failures. But the muscle memory is so DNAized, for lack of a better expression, that it's hard to separate that. The commitment to the front foot is instinctual. You could hold it for some time, and then it eventually gives in. It's like somebody's constantly tempting you with candy. You refer, like marshmallow or something, and you're just like, no, I don't want to have it. No, I don't have it. And the fifth time, the sixth time, you're like, well, maybe a little bit, and then you give in to it. That's what is happening. It's the mind thing that is where the problem is. And I'm just giving you, so now you know where it is coming from, right? So there has been the hustle, the jostle, the fight to get to where you are and to make a statement, to revel in instant glory because the stadium is packed. Nobody wants to see you defend. They want to see how neatly you played that shot. Commentators and experts and pundits also say, oh, that was a scrappy innings. And players of the caliber and class of Mr. Virat Kohli don't like that. Oh, he was a scrappy. Like, not the case. I mean, it's a good compare that Mr. Steven Smith, who plays, almost like unorthodox, crappy, I won't call it crappy, scrappy cricket, but super effective, like mentally. Mr. Kane Williamson is still a little more orthodox. But as the case with Mr. Virat Kohli, it's like an image lock because of the whole setup that surrounds him. Unfortunately, it costs Team India, a series or a match or whatever. Likewise, the case with Mr. Rohit Sharma. No doubting their talent or ability, right? They're huge. And historically, just the other day, they won the World Cup, right? And today, you're paying for the guy's retirement. And it's a touch unfair, but the stakes are so high that you can't help but question. Because if you see some of the press conferences, these press conferences are ridiculous, right? So there are no tough questions that nobody asks. Like they ask you what happened, and they say, "Yeah, so we bowled badly, we batted badly, and so we could have stuck a little longer, and then we should have avoided the collapse." And well, yeah, we know that. What we are trying to ask is, why is it happening? Why is it? And then they, as at sports, smart speakers often do, they push back and say, yeah, this is sport, right? Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. Well, that's not the point and question. The point and question is how you win and how you lose matters. So when these kind of events happen and social media has this divided audience or mixed audience, the youngsters will react very differently, largely. And I have nothing against youngsters, just so that you know. They will obviously be very passionate that Mr. Virat Kohli is my favorite. Right? End of story. Please be patient. Don't you know how much the person has contributed to Indian cricket? What's wrong with that? And then the nuanced, just a slightly older audience will have a nuanced view which contradicts. Right? And so, more often than not, for someone like you who's probably stumbling on to social media, the chances are you will find more tweets or posts from that section of the audience and probably lesser quantity and volume from the other set. And so there are a few commentators who have a very nuanced and balanced view on the ongoings. So if you think of Mr. Harsha Bogle, for example, comes across as very balanced. Even he gets trolled. Right? He's a very I have a lot of respect for the gentleman because he's a student of the game and has a very astute observer. Right, he brings out the nuances exceedingly well. He gets trolled, and what we have to realize is not everybody is trolling them. Right? There's a section of audience, and I give you the reasoning. So the feistiness that you see online, the fierceness that you see online, is largely on account of the fact that you have a energetic youth audience, very passionate about the star on screen more than anything else. And of course, there is the nationalistic fervor, there is unmatched patriotism, right? There is like, and it's again very similar, right? So you cannot critique anything, otherwise you are misrepresented or misunderstood, as is the case with Mr. Manjarekar, right? Sanjay Manjarekar. He often says the right things with the classical unpopular opinion. And then, as is expected, that set of audience largely misunderstands and then reacts emotionally. And of course, they are expert critics themselves, and therefore they express themselves over the top celebrations. There's no holding back and let me understand what the gentleman is trying to say, in what context. Sometimes, in the heat of the moment, it also comes across that way. That is where all the confusion and the noise starts to generate, right? So keep all these points and factors in mind. India is a beautiful country. It's a fascinating. And I don't say this because I'm an Indian. I say this because the power of the country lies in its youth. It is just an energetic place. The vibrancy is huge, right? And that's what is currency. If you look at it from a broadcasting standpoint, if you look at it from a ticket sales standpoint, if you look at it from a commerce standpoint, that is the one. People like us are not the broadcasters' target audience. But be very clear about it, which is why whenever you see broadcasts covering, like even the Border Gasper Trophy, every day there will be a section on Mr. Kohli, as if he's the only player in 1 to 11, and very little or no content on other players. And it's a broadcasting thing, but that gets your TRP ratings. The hero worship, the idol worship is there. And so, who can blame the broadcaster, right? Because what else do you do? The man pulls in the moolah. So, what else? There's nothing else that one can argue beyond it. I mean, of course, we can argue, but we don't. And so, to paint Indian cricket administrators as the big bad boys of international cricket is often taken a step too far. Because if other regions, other countries were in a similar situation, which they were, they pretty much did the way they wanted it, right? So then it's not in their syllabus; it's somebody else's book. So yeah, you got to fall in line and be as reasonable as possible. And there are enough naysayers within the country, critique, who keep reminding the powers that be what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong. So there is a degree of accountability. Can there be more? Absolutely, yes. But it's not like it's absent and everybody's doing money. It's like many of our neighbors, Pakistan, they often tend to think that it's only because of money and there is no talent. Like, no, of course there is money. There is a serious amount of talent in that BCCI has. And so money does move things around, including the venues of Champions Trophy. I cannot disagree to that. But there's the geopolitical angle to it. And people have often said, right, don't mix sport with politics. But that's always been the case in case of Pakistan. Mr. Mohsin Naqvi is the interior minister, is a government representative, isn't he? So then what are we saying? How are we delineating the two? You can't delineate the two, right? So especially in the subcontinent, the geopolitics is off the charts. And so you will have to consider that. And that's what the outcome of which you see on social media. So when the fans interact, there is often abuse, then there is unparliamentary conversation. There's never a healthy debate. And I'd urge not to have enter into these kind of debates, because they usually spiral out of context, and you will have some random commentary, and then the bots will kick in, and it's not worth it. You do need to identify three or four reasonable commentators, observe them, and once you like what they have to share, by all means follow them. It'll give you a little more balanced view of what is going on in the country. That's all I had about the cultural aspect of cricket in India, with respect to the geopolitics, the demography, the geography. And so I hope it gives you a better insight. Clearly, there's so much more to cover. I'm sure I must have missed out some 10, 15 other things. But let me know in the comments that if this is something that made you rethink the way you thought India. Right? So it's very difficult to represent India absolutely accurately, because there's so many moving parts, so many different things, but one tries as much. And I needed to do this episode because there's so much of misunderstanding that is emanating from all this noise that is happening. There has to be some content which gives you, look, here is the other side of the story, or the 360-degree view. So I hope if you've stuck around till now, I'm guessing you've probably liked the content. Please do, like they say, like, share, and subscribe, and share with those who care. I mean, I'm not here to, become the next big thing on YouTube or anything. It's a very, like I said, slow burn, building a tribe of patient people who are, who have the maturity to take a contrarian opinion or a point of view, and then share some of theirs without being offensive, abusive, or anything. That's it, my friends. Thank you so much for listening to me. You know where to reach me. You can go on to platform X and do Ionisms, #Ionisms, AAYANISMS, or leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. I do my best to generate a weekly video, but hey, it is what it is. Till we meet the next time, stay well, stay safe. My name is Ian, and you are watching Ionisms.